So in August 2023, the director of Creatures Inc., the company that make and produce Pokemon cards, sat down for an interview with Christian from comicbook.com. They talked about a few topics, like do Creatures Inc. have an idea where the meta will go when they make cards, or what their biggest surprise deck of all time was. Today though, we're going to be deep diving the card that sprung to Nagashima's mind when he was asked, is there a specific card you regret making? The card in question, after it was released, caused havoc on our metagame, caused the deck so strong that Pokemon had to step in and ban something to stop it working. And after that, it still won US Nationals and got second place at the World Championships as well. It was the most hated card in existence right up until it rotated. The story of the one card Pokemon regret making the most. So what is this card then? What is it that caused so much destruction? Well, it's none other than Seismitoad EX. Sure, Seismitoad is an unlikely villain looking at him, but trust me, this card caused havoc on our metagame, single-handedly with its attack Quaking Punch that will deal 30 damage and make your opponent unable to play items for the next turn. Now, in case you didn't know, items are the engine of most Pokemon decks, taking up to around 30% of them. And in the 2015 metagame, we had some of the best item cards we have ever seen, like Ultra Ball, which should let you search your deck for any Pokemon and put it in your hand. VS Seeker, which should let you grab any supporter card from your discard pile and put it into your hand, ready for immediate use. Trainer's Mill, which should let you look at the top 4 cards of your deck and you can take any trainer card you found there and put it in your hand. Even the ace specs like Computer Search or Dowsing Machine, which pretty much every deck would play, were items. All of these items were integral for a player to set up and get in the game. Quaking Punch will stop all that immediately, all for a single double colourless energy attachment, meaning you could spring this out immediately on your first turn going second, often giving them exactly 1 turn of item cards, which often isn't enough. And if he was going first, you could play the Gets This supporter, which would shuffle away all item cards from your opponent's hand back into the deck, meaning they could often have 0 turns of items, because you could Gets This away all the items and then Quaking Punch next turn. Since Seismitoad EX was a basic Pokemon 2 with 180 HP, it was perfectly capable of absorbing the limited damage that your opponent could muster up, with their limited setups of course. And with cards like Super Scoop Up and AZ, both of which would return a Seismitoad back to your hand, you could completely heal that minor damage off and keep firing off Quaking Punches. And that was the goal, just to keep and announce Quaking Punch turn after turn after turn. Trainer Lock has always been very strong in the Pokemon TCG. We only have to look at other cards like Manectric EX, who would lock them off via its disconnect attack, or Slowking all the way back in Neo, who would lock items from the bench. Both of these cards have won World Championships too, by the way. So we can already see that Seismitoad was destined for greatness as soon as it came out. And after the next set, Phantom Forces and Roaring Skies were released, that is when Seismitoad was off to destroy the Pokemon TCG. The player base quickly cottoned on that if you could further stop your opponent from playing the game whilst announcing Quaking Punch, you were set to win pretty much every time. So the Toad Puff and the Toad Shaman decks were born. These decks would look to draw their whole deck, or close enough to it, in a single turn. Shaman EX setup ability would let you draw till you have 6 cards in your hand when you put it into play. And you could often bench like 2 or 3 of these in a single turn, to draw, 10 plus cards in a single turn. And then with Super Scoop Up, you could pick the Shaman back up, put it back down, and start to reuse them over and over again. Or some players would opt to use Tasting Slurper, who would let you draw extra cards. But why were players turboing through their deck so much though? Well, this was so that they could find and play all their Crushing Hammers and Hypnotoxic Lasers. Crushing Hammer would let you flip a coin. If heads, you would discard an energy attached to any one of your opponent's Pokemon. So you could remove your opponent's energy, and then use Quaking Punch, so that means they can't even attack and they can't use items as well. If you ever got to this scenario, you would pretty much win. In case your opponent did get some energy on board and you couldn't remove it however, that's where Hypnotoxic Laser would step in. It was an item card that would poison your opponent's Pokemon instantly, which when used in combination with Burbank City Gym would actually boost your damage output by 30, making Quaking Punch actually an offensive threat now as well. However, 25% of the time it would leave your opponent's active Pokemon asleep on their turn. In Pokemon, if your active Pokemon is asleep, you can't attack. Simple. Some players would even opt to use long distance hypnosis Muna to have another shot at making your opponent's active Pokemon asleep. The combination of hammers, sleeping and poison made it very hard to get back in the game, often impossible for the most part, especially if the Seismitoad player had a muscle band attached too, because that would boost your Quaking Punch damage by 20. This meant Quaking Punch was now 3-shotting EX Pokemon in ideal circumstances, which is terrifying, putting you on a deadly clock. But what made this combination so deadly was Lissandre's Trump card. This would shuffle in all cards from both players' discard piles back into their deck, meaning all those Super Scoop Ups, Crushing Hammers, Trainer's Mails could all be used again, ready for you to shame in or slurp off into them and spam them again. This deck was so strong that the format delved into players just playing Toad Min or Toad Puff decks, with it winning UK Nationals 2015 with the final being a mirror match, and it won Australia Nationals, with the top 3 decks all being Toad Min as well as 8th place, and it got a 2nd place at French Nationals and 4th place at German Nationals. This widespread destruction of the game was noticed by TPCI, who wanted to step in quickly before US Nationals, which is their biggest event of the year by attendance, and they didn't want that to become a Toad Min or Toad Puff fest as well. So they stepped in and hot banned Lissandre's Trump card from the game. This obviously made the draw all your disruption cards in a single turn strategy useless, because you wouldn't have enough resources left to close the game out. This worked on face value for sure, except TPCI's worst nightmare came true, and Toad still won US Nationals, except this time it was a brand new style archetype that, while wasn't as explosive as Toad Min, it was every bit as disruptive and, to be honest, sad to play against. And this new variant was Toad-Garbodor, a monstrous combo that would pair Quaking Punch and Ability Lock, and since Garbodor's Garbotoxin would turn off all abilities while it was online, this would stop any Shaming EX or Bronzong from moving around Metal Energy, or Blastoise's Deluge ability as well. This double whammy of dirtiness would make the game unplayable most of the time for your opponent, since even if your opponent got off to a hot start, you always had the equalizer of N and Garbotoxin. N was a supporter card that would shuffle both players' hands back into their deck, and then they would draw the same amount as prize cards they had left. So, if your opponent had KO'd 1 or maybe even 2 of your Seismitoads, you could reset their hand down to 4 or 2 and then ability lock them, remove their energy with Crushing Hammers, and maybe even KO their attacker, making a comeback virtually impossible. And bear in mind, Toad-Garb still had the Laser Bank combo to fall back on as well. This deck was so strong that it won US National 2015 with 3-time world champion Jason Klaczynski at the helm. It wasn't all about ability lock for Toad decks though, since one of the other most popular variants relied on them heavily, and this variant got 2nd place at 2015 Worlds. Crobat line from Phantom Forces had the Sneaky Bite and Surprise Bite abilities. These would let you deal 20 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon when you evolved into it, and then Crobat would deal 30 damage via Surprise Bite. So the whole use of the evolutionary line would bolster your Quaking Punch damage by 50. This gave Quaking Punch a whole new layer of offensive potency. And with Laser Bank combo and Super Scoop Up, those bat lines were ripe for abuse. Some players would even add Manectric EX into the mix here too, to give you an overrun threat that was great at dissecting low HP Pokemon like the Night March attacking core. And Assault Laser would be a high damage output attack when paired with Head Ringer, a tool card that Seismitoad decks would often always play, that you could attach to your opponent's Pokemon EX, and that would increase their attack cost by 1 colorless energy, making Quaking Punch even that much more disruptive, especially if you were flipping heads on your Crushing Hammers. This Toad Manectric Bats deck got 7th place at US Nationals that year as well. And just straight up, Toad Bats got 2nd place at 2015 Worlds. The last 2015 variant I want to draw your attention to is a surprise deck that got top 8 at 2015 Worlds, and that was Aroma's Box. This deck would revolve around Aroma's ability Fairy Transfer, which would let you move around Fairy Energy attached to your Pokemon. This would let you move around the Rainbow Energy, and it would also open up a ton of doors to different attackers, like Seismitoad's 2nd attack Grenade Hammer, Revenant EX, and Cobalion EX too. Malamar EX could also be used here, which would let you put your opponent's active to sleep when you attach an energy to it, because then you could always turn attach to the Malamar and then use Fairy Transfer to move it off to where it was actually needed. However, the main use here was to let you use Max Potion and Fairy Garden. Fairy Garden was a stadium card that would give any Pokemon that had a fairy energy attached to it, or rainbow energy, a free retreat card, which is very nice. But Max Potion was a true game changer. This would let you fully heal a Pokemon, but the downside is that you had to discard all energy from it. Discarding all your energy is normally way too much of a downside to make Max Potion playable. However, when you had Fairy Transfer, you could just move all the energy away from your Seismitoad, play the Max Potion to completely heal the Toad, and then move all the energy back afterwards. Dirty combo. So that wraps up Seismitoad in 2015, but in 2016 it was set to evolve some more. Seismitoad Giratina got 2nd place and 3rd place at US Nationals and German Nationals respectively, as well as 4th place at ECC, which is the biggest event in Europe at the time. This used Giratina EX to make life harder for other decks. First up, Giratina had the Renegade Pulse ability, which would make it immune to damage from Mega Evolution Pokemon. That would completely wall some decks out, like Mega Manectric or Primal Groudon. 2 decks that traditionally Seismitoad didn't really like. And then its attack Chaos Wheel would stop your opponent from playing any tool cards, stadium cards, or special energy from their hand next turn. So, against other Seismitoad decks, you could remove their DCE with Xerosic or Team Flagrant, then use Chaos Wheel to stop them from ever attaching a special energy for the rest of the game, effectively locking them out of the game forever. And since Chaos Wheel did 100 damage, it's not really the kind of attack you could absorb forever, making for a dangerous deck that players had to keep an eye on. Straight Toad. Straight Toad got 2nd place at ECC 2016, which is the biggest event in Europe at the time. And as its name suggests, it was just a straight up Toad archetype with no other frills. What it did have though was a ridiculous amount of healing and tanking, with cards like Rough Seas and Assault Vest making an appearance here. Rough Seas would let you heal 30 damage from all your water types or lightning types once per turn, and Assault Vest would reduce damage taken by Pokemon with a special energy attached to it by 40. This meant against other Seismitoad decks or Giratina decks, Seismitoad was just absorbing damage and healing it. And with all the extra space saved from not playing any other Pokemon, you could play extra copies of disruption cards like Team Flagrant as well. Aqua Box was Toad's last variant, and it is what took the 2016 World Championships by storm. This time, players would lean into the offensive powers of Seismitoad, with cards like Max Elixir, to fling extra water energy into play fast. And since Max Elixir would let you accelerate any water energy to any basic Pokemon, you started to see a wider range of attackers get used, like Articuno to take extra prizes on low HP Pokemon, like the Night March attackers, thanks to his Delta Plus Ancient trait, and Glaceon, who would double damage done on the opponent's active with its second bite attack, or completely wall out evolution Pokemon with his Crystal Ray attack as well. In addition to that, Aqua Box decks would play Manaphy EX as well, who would give all Pokemon with a water energy attached to it a free retreat cost, very nice, and Mineral Pump would actually heal damage as well. A theme that was carried over from the Straight Toad decks, since this top 32 World 2016 deck also had Rough Seas, Shaman EX, who would heal 20 damage from all your Pokemon once per turn, and it even had Fighting Fury Bell, tool card that you could attach to any basic Pokemon, and that Pokemon now had an extra 40 HP and would deal an extra 10 damage, making Seismitoad a 220 HP basic Pokemon, firing off Quaking Punches and Grenade Hammers. But with that top 32 placement at 2016 Worlds, Seismitoad's time spent in the standard format was over, and it had to sail into the sunset of rotation. But it still dominated expanded events even to this day, despite it having to compete with close to 10 years of power creep. For example, it just got 9th place at the Champions League event in Aichi when paired with Mew V Max. But make no mistake about it, it ruled the format. It was a card that players hated, despised even, just having to hear Quaking Punch announced turn after turn after turn. And it was those reasons why that Creatures Inc. regretted hating it the most. Real quick, I have to give a shout out to this video sponsor, Dragon Shield. They make the best accessories in the game, and if you want to get your hands on some and save yourself some money, click the link down there and use my code BERT to get 5% off, and it helps me out too. Let's get back to the video. Thanks for watching. If you made it this far, why don't you like the video and consider subscribing? And why don't you check out this video here, where I look at every Pokemon's best card ever printed. Trust me, it's a fun one.